Thanks for joining us. We've got a couple of other people that are coming in, so we will carry on admitting people as we go. Just to introduce ourselves, I'm Tracy, and I've also got Tony here today as well, so we'll be hosting the session for you. There's also a couple of others from our teams in the chat, so if you've got any questions and you want to use the chat boxes, we are watching them as well. We are recording the session, so you're quite welcome to have your cameras and microphones on or off as you want to, but just be aware that it is being recorded. If you want to change your name for the purpose of the session, it's absolutely fine to do so on Zoom. Quite a relaxed session for you today. So we're going to be talking to you about redundancy and outplacement support and how the two can work together to create a seamless process for those of you who are either managing the process or going through the process. Please do ask us any questions as you go through. We're happy to either do them as we go through the session. What we will do at the end, as we always do, is turn off the recording. So if you've got questions that you want to ask unrecorded, hold on to them till the end, and we're happy to address those before we finish. So I will just share my screen, and please join in and ask any questions that you need to as we go through. So sorry, just bear with us a moment and we'll just get this to come up. Sorry, I won't be a second. I'm just having trouble getting that to share properly. Okay, so the first part of the session that I'll share will be talking you through the redundancy section. So talking kind of from an HR point of view, how you can manage redundancies within your teams, what kind of questions and challenges you may come across, and how to make that as much as a kind of seamless process as you can for anybody involved. Obviously, it's never easy, and it's something that as people managing the process or for your teams going through it, lots of different things to consider. Can everybody see the screen okay? Please let me know if not.
So we've introduced the screen, but it's also showing your next slides on the side, which it doesn't normally do.
Oh, okay. It's showing it in a different... Is that better?
Still the same.
Still the same. Okay, sorry. Let me just try and reshare that. So we're having a few technical problems today with getting screens to share. So let me just try and share again in a different way. Let's see if this one works better. Is that better?
We can now see the view, like the PowerPoint view there, rather than the actual slide. It was perfect a minute ago before we started, wasn't it?
It was. It all worked this morning. Sorry, we will stop the recording and we'll start this again in a moment. So just bear with us. Sorry, we're just I think Zoom has done introduced ourselves, so you know sort of who we are and what we're doing. Any other questions at all from anybody before we get going? If so, like we say, you're welcome to use mics or chat boxes or hold on to them till the end. So what we're looking at today is redundancy. So what is a redundancy? We're going to give you an overview of how to manage the redundancy process from a business and an individual point of view. So thinking about, as a business owner or an HR person or a manager, what your role is, but also how you can help people throughout that process. And one of the ways that you can help people is through outplacement support. So Tony will talk to you about that a bit more later. But outplacement support is a way of supporting the employees to move on, to find something else. So we'll look at what a redundancy is and what the different stages are, and talk to you a little bit through kind of the emotional side of redundancies as well. We'll talk to you a little bit about change and how to manage the change process, and then some practical things about the reality of the job market as it is today, preparing for life after redundancy, what kind of support you can offer, like outplacement support. And Tony will talk to you about the current job market, so ATSs, CVs, how you can support through coaching and mentoring. So kind of a run through of the end-to-end stage really, and how you can support your people and look after yourselves. Tony will introduce himself when we start, but to give you a bit of an idea of our background. So I've got an HR consultancy, as you know, so we deal with the redundancy side of the process, so actually supporting the companies through. Tony is a career coach and has a CV writing and career coaching business. And I also work alongside Tony, where we're both members of the BACVW, which is the Association of CV Writers. So we do quite a lot of career coaching, interview skills, redundancy skills. So quite a lot of knowledge between us on both the business side and the person side. So redundancy, it's really important to remember, relates to roles and not people. So when you make a redundancy in your business, you're making a role redundant, not a person. And sometimes that can really help when you're communicating that to people, that this isn't personal. You know, it's not about specific individuals, it's about the role and the structure. And there's two different types of redundancy that you may manage, which is a small scale redundancy, and that relates to under 20 people. Now, with a small scale redundancy, there's no legal formal process to follow. There are ACAS guides and there are requirements, like the requirement to have a face-to-face meeting, the requirement for representation, but there's no actual specified process. You just need to make sure it's fair. With a large scale redundancy, that relates to more than 20 redundancies over a 3-month period. And there is a different process here, which is very legal and very statutory. So if you're making a redundancy which relates to more than 20 people over 3 months, remember that you need to follow the large scale redundancy process. So the principles are the same in terms of consulting and discussing with your, your employees and your business, but there are certain legal things that you have to do. So always seek advice before you get to the point of, of starting the process, and make sure that you're following the right steps for what you're doing. Redundancy can occur in a number of different occasions, but the legal definition of a redundancy is where part or all of the business is either closing or has already closed, is changing the types or number of roles that are needed to do the work, or changing location. So let me say, very much about the job and the needs of the job and the needs of the business. And these will be the legal criteria that you could make a redundancy against. Now, one of the most important parts of any redundancy process is communication. So keep your messages, keep your communication clear, consistent and honest. You know, make sure what you're telling people is unambiguous and is really easy to understand. Redundancy can be a really difficult process, as we'll see as we move through, emotionally for people. And the easier you can make those messages and the more you can make sure that people understand what you're telling them, the better. That also relates to your managers, your directors, your HR consultants. You know, if you're delegating these redundancies to other people, make sure that they also know what they're doing and that they're equipped with the messages that they're delivering. Make sure that you give time for questions. Obviously, as a legal part of the redundancy, there will be a consultation process, but making sure there is time for people to ask questions and answering those questions is really important. And don't be afraid to discuss different support or different personal worries. You know, we tell people very much, and I've told you already today, that redundancy is about a role and about a job, but the knock-on of that is about family, it's about finances, it's about career prospects. And redundancy can have a massive effect on people. You know, it affects their lives, it affects all aspects of their lives. And don't be afraid to deal with that kind of more emotional side. Like we say, Tony will pick up on this a little bit more later, but think about what else you can do aside from just delivering the message to help your staff. Now, small scale redundancies, as we said, affects up to 20 people in a 90-day period. We always say to people, before you start anything, document your redundancy plan. So detail why you're making the changes, what's the financial impact, how have you selected the roles you've selected. So get all of your thoughts down in paper, because as you go through the process, it's really helpful to have that to keep referring back to, and it keeps you on track in your communication and your messages as well. You need to meet with the employees and you need to explain the situation to them. In terms of the law, this then puts them at risk of redundancy. So no decisions are made at this point. This is the point where you tell them that there is a potential, there is a possibility of redundancy, and you place them at risk. That then opens up a consultation period, which generally is a week to 2, but time for you to go off and look at any alternatives and for them to have a think about any alternatives. And then obviously you come back together and make your decisions. So there's different ways that you can select what staff are at risk of redundancy. And you may have a selection pool where you put all different people that are doing the same role into a pool. You might select by role. So if you're only planning to lose one position or one department, it's very easy to identify who they are. You might have certain selection criteria where you're selecting based on qualification perhaps, or specific training that they've done. Or you may want to put a wider pool of people at risk of redundancy and then announce a new structure so people can apply for a new job within the new structure. So lots of different ways you can process this. What way you choose really depends what's in your plan, how complicated it is, how detailed it is, you know, and what route is obviously best for the business. And then you will have another meeting. Legally, on a small scale redundancy, you need to meet with them at least once formally. And that formal meeting gives the right to be accompanied. Now, in a straightforward redundancy, that may be the end of the process where you meet with them, you then issue the notice of redundancy. You might have more stages, so you might want more consultation meetings or some group meetings. So you can add into that anything that you want to, but that would be kind of the legal minimum.
Tracy, we have a question from Lee in the chat. If
Yep.
you're working for the NHS and are made redundant, can you reapply straight away for the role in the NHS, or is it the same as voluntary redundancy, where you have to wait 6 months?
It would depend on the terms of your NHS contract. Generally speaking, if a role is made redundant, it's because that role doesn't exist. So you would be unlikely to be able to apply straight away for the same role in the same location, but there may be other roles at that band that they would let you apply for, but you need to check the terms of your redundancy agreement. And then the other type of redundancies you could get would be a large scale redundancy process. So like we say, this affects 20 or more redundancies in a 90-day period. So with these, you need to be thinking ahead a little bit or looking behind a little bit to make sure that you don't exceed that 20. If you do, there's a legal process that you go through. So you have to hold collective consultation, which you may do via your unions or you may do via employee representatives. So you don't physically have to consult with 20 people individually to start with. You can do it via collective consultation. The consultation needs to be meaningful. And this is the same with the short scale redundancies as well. It needs to be meaningful, but when you consult, you don't necessarily have to agree. You just have to consider. Document what you've considered and make sure that you do take any feedback into account. All other processes are similar to small scale redundancies with the exception of the HR1 form. So before you start a large scale redundancy process, you have to complete what's called an HR1 form that gets submitted to the government. And that's the notification of a large scale redundancy taking place. With everything else, it's pretty much the same process that you followed already. So consulting, listening, reaching your decision. Now, when you have a member of staff in your team who may be pregnant or a new parent, that does open up potential discrimination risk. So the reasons that you can't discriminate on, as I'm sure you all know, under the Equality Act would be age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership, pregnancy, race, religion, sex or sexual orientation. So they are the 9 reasons that form discrimination in the UK. For pregnant employees or those on maternity, they are protected from redundancy from the notification of pregnancy until 18 months after the birth. So again, this comes down to your processes, like we said a moment ago. If you've got a pregnant employee who has told their line manager that they're pregnant, but the line manager hasn't documented that or reported that or told you, that can make it really difficult for you to know that that person is protected. So think about your internal processes, think about where information gets logged. But from the point of pregnancy till 18 months after birth, that protection is in place. No, it doesn't mean you can't make a pregnant or a new mum redundant at all. If it is a genuine redundancy and the job doesn't exist, then obviously you can go ahead. What it does mean is they've got an automatic right to be placed into any suitable role. So if you had a team, for example, of 3 people, you need to cut that down to 2 people for finance reasons, but one of them is pregnant, they would automatically be placed into one of those remaining roles. So really, really important just to consider any risk and any discrimination as you're going through these processes. When you're thinking about risk, think about your right of appeal. So for small scale redundancies, it's not legal, although it's certainly advisable to offer the right of appeal. We'll pick up on this a little bit later when Tony takes over, but survivor syndrome, as it's often called, is thinking about the impact on the staff left behind. Sometimes you're really focused on the person that's being made redundant, and you may forget to consider the impact that this has on other staff. Are they fearing their own roles, or are they looking at how you've managed the process and how that affects their view of you? So don't forget to think about your remainers as well as your leavers. And think about outplacement support. As we say, we're going to cover this in detail later, so I won't go through it, but having outplacement support certainly minimises your risk, of sort of issues. And then when you're looking at pay, there's a formula, as you may already know, and redundancy pay is based on a formula of age, length of service and physical wages. Generally speaking, it's 1.5 weeks pay for every year over 41. It's a week's pay for between 22 and 41 and a half a week for under 22 or sort of 21 and under. There is a link on the government website. You can just Google statutory redundancy pay and it will take you to the link. It is currently capped at £750. It went up in April and it does change every April. So just be mindful of that April date if you're doing anything that crosses over. And it is capped at 20 years service, regardless of how long they've worked for you. So the maximum statutory redundancy pay is currently 22,500. And that figure is paid tax-free, and it's paid in addition to their notice, their holiday, which are all taxable. Okay. And then before you get to the stage of redundancy, it's really important to consider other changes that you can make internally. So you might want to look at things like changing working hours, freezing recruitment. Think about your location. You know, in COVID, for example, a lot of offices closed and people worked from home, which has saved a lot of money for companies. Could people job share? Do you want to go out for voluntary redundancy and give people the chance to volunteer themselves? Temporary layoffs, relocations, short-time working. So these are just a few of the options to consider. But do make sure that you kind of give those due consideration, because they may remove the need for redundancies. So as part of your redundancy process, think about your consultation. Make sure you've spoken to the workforce and said to them, speak to your people and say, look, we're now entering a consultation process. We really want your feedback, because they may come up with ideas for you. As we saw there around job shares, people may come back and offer to drop their hours or to job share. So really do ask for their views and get them involved. Allow time for people to consider the proposals. Remember, when you have that first message to tell them they're at risk, they'll probably be in shock. They may be quite upset. They might not take in a lot of this information. And then when you issue your decision, make sure you follow your contract. So follow your notice clauses, consider appeals, consider how you're going to communicate this to everybody else. And then the importance of a fair process. So there's lots of reasons to get this right. Staff morale, survivor syndrome, as we talked about earlier, reputational damage, minimising your own risk of kind of comebacks and tribunals. So the fairer and the easier you can make this process for everybody, the less likely you are to have issues and challenges from it. Now, remember, when you're terminating employment, redundancy is a termination. There's only 5 legal reasons in the UK that you can terminate employment, and that is performance, capability, redundancy, illness, a statutory illegality, or SOSA, which is a 6th reason, which is basically some other substantial reason that isn't one of the ones listed above. Now, redundancy on its own is a fair reason for termination. So we always say to people, as long as you follow the process and as long as you have your evidence and as long as you have everything that you need for this to run through, don't complicate it by bringing in other things. You don't need to justify that unless it's part of selection matrix with performance or with anything else at all. It's a redundancy. It's about the role, and keep to your message, keep to your communication. It is a fair reason for termination. Obviously, you can have retirement or resignation. So people may choose to leave you, which is absolutely fine. That's not you terminating them. Just a little bit here on the change process. So change can be really difficult for everybody. It can be hard for you to manage change. It can be hard for you to go through change. So when you're dealing with change, it comes down to communication, as we say, defining the objectives, assessing what the current situation is, write down your plans, come up with a kind of business plan or a consultation document, implement and monitor it, stabilize the change, support your team through the change and realize that this is difficult on everybody. And then don't forget to evaluate it. We just had a question earlier about how soon can you reapply for a role. You may go through a redundancy and lose a role, and then 6 months later need that job back in again. That's absolutely fine, because things do change. So just keep open-minded and kind of monitor the process. Some of you may have seen this before, but this is just a reminder before I finish up of the change cycle. So people will go through this all the time. The forming stage is where your team are getting to know each other. They're forming, everything's new. And this may be the start of the relationship, or it might be the start of the working after the redundancy. You then go through a storming phase, which is often the redundancy itself. Things are very difficult. Things are very up in the air. People then settle down and you move into norming. So everybody's just doing their job. They're all just getting on. You will then move into performing, which is where people start to do well. They find their role in the team. You've adapted to the change. But then it only takes one thing to change and you're back to the beginning again. And it's really important to remember that redundancies, change, and indeed management itself is a constant cycle. Nothing will ever be going well all the time. And there'll always be this cycle of kind of up and downs. So that brings me to the end of my section. So I will hand you over in a moment to Tony, who will share his screen a bit more successfully than I did, hopefully, and talk to you about the importance of outplacement support. There is a QR code on the screen. We'll also pop it round after, but if you're happy to leave any reviews or send through in testimonials for the training, myself and Tony would really appreciate that. So I will stop sharing now, just while Tony hands over to his screen. Are there any other questions at all that anybody would like to ask, or anything you want to clarify? No, everybody's happy. We just got a couple of bits in the chat. Let me just have a quick look at those. Will the slides be sent out afterwards? Yes, we're happy to send slides out if anybody wants them, or a handout of the slides. That's absolutely fine. Oh, Sam's already answered that. We've also got a recording available, so we'll pop that onto our YouTube channel, and Tony will also have that to share as well. So if you want the recordings, that's fine. Like so, we can do you a handout of any slides. Okay, I will stop talking now and hand you over to Tony, who will talk us through the outplacement part of the session.
Excellent, thank you, Tracy. First of all, can you see my slides okay? Has that worked? Excellent, great. Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you for inviting me along. It's a pleasure to come and speak to everyone and sort of be part of this story to help navigate how you can do the redundancy side of things in an organization, but the importance of making sure that the outplacement support is there to support them beyond that journey. So I'm here to tell you a lot more about that. And the same as Tracy, if there's any questions or anything that you want to ask, just pop them in the chat and I'm happy to sort of go through those as we go through the session, or we've got time for Q&A at the end. So first of all, who am I and what is my background? So CV interview and career transition coach. I've been working for PwC for about 8 years prior to that, where I gained some experience in this field. And then I went independent over the last year and a half and have been supporting individuals understand their skills, their capabilities, write CVs and interviews. And Tracy and I have connected, as you mentioned earlier, through the British Association of CV Writers, where we're both certified to be able to support individuals through this type of journey. In terms of what I'm going to cover today, we'll focus on the actual emotional and practical challenges of going through redundancy for individuals who are going through that process, and then to give you some of the reality of today's job market, because it has significantly changed over the last few years due to some circumstances that we'll go through in the presentation. We'll cover what this ultimately means for the individuals, so the type of pressures they're under and how they need to adapt. And then finally, the benefits of outplacement support and how organizations can help these people find from one role to the next. So whenever you're back into the job market, it can come across incredibly daunting whenever you first get that overview that you're back into the market. People tend to lose confidence despite all the effort that you put in to getting the presentation right and making sure that you've had the right type of conversation. But despite that, as Tracy alluded to, they can still reflect on it, feel like their confidence is gone. And ultimately, it takes time to build back up and see what that future value can look like before they're actually even ready to apply for those type of roles. Then you've got the modern recruitment cycles, which have drastically changed since the last decade because of the amount of applications that we have and with more technology that are brought on. A lot of people, particularly those who've worked for organizations for a long time, have usually found the role through a networking opportunity that they had, or they might have a friend who referred them in. And that kind of activity still very much happens today. But because of the volume of applicants there are, we're now seeing level 1, level 2, level 3 presentations, different things that people who've been enrolled for a long time have completely lost their practice with. And then at the moment out there is a culture of what is called ghosting when it comes to the application process. And this is simply where recruiters are being bombarded with so much information that sadly they're not circling back in the ways that candidates would like to. So they don't know if they've got the role, they don't know the outcome, they're very rarely getting any feedback. So it means that they've gone through this process of being made redundant and they're being thrown into a market that's a little bit daunting for them to try and get their head around. As a result of that, obviously, it can feel quite lonely and demoralizing. If you think about it, for those who have partners, they're watching their other half go out to work every day whilst they sit down to their laptop, go onto LinkedIn, go onto the job boards and try to find that next kind of solution again, day after day as they go through that journey versus going into the office or joining that Teams call with the previous people they worked with. So it does require that emotional and practical support to get through it, and they need support to make sure they've got a positive mindset throughout that journey, because that's the kind of energy they need to be applying to finding the right kind of job, putting the effort into the applications, and then showcasing their skills when it comes to an interview. So it can be tough when they're sitting at home and seeing that environment in front of them and not maybe getting the progress that they were hoping for. So let's focus a wee bit further on the reality of today's job market, just to give a sense of exactly what it's like out there. Ultimately, the market has changed. There are expanded talent pools. So a lot of companies are going through the process of restructuring and deciding to make people redundant. Equally, we've also got companies who are changing their terms of working. So people, for example, might have got used to remote working who are being asked back into the office, or they might be feeling unsettled by the fact redundancies are happening around them and wanting to jump ship before they actually get made redundant themselves. So when you blend that perfect storm together, we've got a lot of people applying for each of the vacancies out there. On the flip side, then, companies are just generally tightening their belts. We're all kind of trying to lower cost as the cost of things increases that sit beyond our control. And with more focus on AI and more focus on technology, companies are leaning into kind of an AI first mentality where can we do this ourselves without the headcount? And then if not, we will hire. And even that job that they hire might be different to what they need to backfill or what they might have originally needed. So it takes a longer time for a company to make a decision about hiring, and they are hiring less people. So when you combine those things together, you've got an expanded talent pool and decreased opportunity, meaning there are hundreds, literally hundreds of applications on average per mid to senior vacancy that are happening for each job that is out there. Then you've got extended timelines with the hiring process. So I mentioned earlier that it is taking longer for companies to advertise roles, to screen the amount of candidates that are coming through, to go through the first, second, third presentation style of the overall piece and select the right candidate. The average time for a mid to senior vacancy at the moment is 17 to 22 weeks from when you advertise that role to when an offer is made and that person starts the organization. So that's a long time. So imagine if that person who has been made redundant applies for the role. They want to get to work as soon as they possibly can, but the average is kind of going against them from where that typically looks. Then you've got the rise of ATS complexity, and this is applicant tracking systems. And to take a step back, this is recruitment software that helps recruiters with applications and making sure that they're on track and scored in the right way. Honestly, it gets quite a lot of bad press, but it does serve a good purpose when people know what to do with it, essentially. And when you've got hundreds of applications coming in, a recruiter will indicate what keywords they're looking for each role. And that system will rank then the CVs based on the matches to those keywords. And that's the bit that's lost in individuals in this market at the moment, because they have one CV, they submit it, and then the keywords don't match and they don't get selected. But once again, they're up against hundreds of people when it comes to that. So being high in that ranking order is a really important step. Because imagine if you're a recruiter and you've got all of these applications, even though you will look at all of them, you've likely seen the best of the bunch at the very top of it, and you've just got the rest of the queue to work through. So human behavior means they're going to be more invested in those better quality CVs compared to what they're seeing from the system. So all of that leaves individuals feeling a little bit lost. When they don't know these things, they do a lot of trial and error in order to try and get things over the line. And that can be where the struggle can come from. So some of the tips that they really need to do is around CV tailoring. So I would advise clients around a 70% match for any role that they're going to go for in order to be considered in this market. And equally taking the time to tailor the CV for each application so they can get a higher yield in the interviews and get a better success rate in that space. Then you've got the element of personal branding that's out there. There are new roles. Job titles are categorized quite differently compared to different things. So people need to take a step back and think, right, what does my job actually mean in this market? What are my transferable skills? What are the individual contributions that I can add value from? And if they don't take a step back to do that and kind of simply apply for the job, that can impact it. So yes, that can cause an impact when it comes to how they market themselves and the type of roles that they ultimately go for. The final bit then is the hidden job market. And this is the single biggest thing that people are succeeding in this market when it comes to trying to find their next role, that people take a long time to adjust to or even build up the courage to try and do. It's updating that LinkedIn profile and making sure that you're showcasing your skills in the right way, and then using it to establish connections. So this could be people that you've previously worked with, people that you've met in the industry before. Any connection that is in a place that you want to work is someone that you need to be speaking to again and having those conversations with. Because if you gain referrals for opportunities, it can often skip the recruitment process and expedite everything that sort of happens. So strategic networking is a really important part of this. And again, it takes a lot of confidence and a lot of build up for people to get to the point where they're ready to start this. And it also can be a bit of a long game, because you might start that conversation and there might not be a vacancy for 6 to 8 weeks or whatever that might look like before they can. So whenever you put all of that together, then you've got individuals who are facing just difficult emotional journeys about hearing that announcement of being made redundant and processing what that news is. So it is the shock and the emotional toll of that unexpected career transition that you're suddenly back into the market. You have to build your confidence back up to get out there and then learn exactly what the job market has shifted. And that's why the importance of outplacement is really strong to sort of help them succeed. And that's where the obligation comes to support individuals who are going through that journey. So in terms of what that can look like, the way I sort of support individuals is starting by a bit of a career deep dive to sort of let them tell their story and get it out of their systems in terms of how they're feeling, what they've done, and ultimately what their skills and preferences are, so that we can help them understand exactly what type of roles they can go for in this market and give them a job strategy for how to find them. Then you create a 2-page CV focused on their core competence and achievements that makes it really easy for them to tweak for each opportunity to help them get more interviews. What we offer as well is a tool where they can upload a CV, upload a job description, and it gives them feedback about whether they should apply for the role and exactly what they need to do to tailor that CV to, again, increase their chances for interviews. And it also helps them with interview preparation to understand the kind of questions they could be asked based on their skills and experience and that vacancy. To create that sense of community as well, they're part of the Career Transition Club. So that's where they're able to come to a call every Monday at 12 and ask others who are on the journey about their experience and what they might be learning, guided by myself as a coach to help and support them on that journey. And then finally, they know the kind of role, they know the CV, they've got the interviews over the line. They need coaching to make sure that they can succeed in an interview and a mock interview so that they can put it into practice and learn in a safe space what they might be doing wrong to increase their chances of getting it right when it comes to an interview. Because sadly, when people go through the interview process, their feedback is just not robust enough for them to make an impact in that decision. So ultimately, people feel supported from a well-being perspective. They start their new job with confidence. They start going through that journey and can hit the market with a bit of a better sense. They have faster results as a result of it because they don't fall down the pitfalls that can take them months to realize that tailoring the CV is the key to this, or not using Easy Apply, for example, on LinkedIn can make a big difference in that sense. So they do get those faster results. They start to receive job offers that they can pick and choose from that are based on the kind of roles that they're actually wanting to. So less of that panic side and more of that side of getting a role that they want to do. And that ultimately leads to long-term job satisfaction. So they can see this experience as a positive rather than the initial negative that they'll perceive it as whenever they go through this journey. And finally, for the organizations then, Tracy sort of alluded to this earlier on as well, it's less complaints, less kind of cause for concern that comes through from the individuals that are coming through that process because they feel supported. Equally, the brand reputation is protected. So you're offering robust support that helps individuals through that journey so that whenever they're telling the story of what's happened, they have a positive lens on what the outcome looks like. If you're offering voluntary severance as well, where people can make the decision and opt in, offering this outplacement support alongside that can help them make that decision to accept it, knowing that they can be guided through that. And ultimately, as organizations, it's never a good decision or it doesn't ever feel good to make a decision where you have to let people go, where you have to go through this redundancy piece. So by offering outplacement support, you give yourself that peace of mind that people have a good chance to see this as a positive and move on to what their next career could potentially look like. So that kind of covers the overview of the outplacement side of things. Again, I have a QR code there that will sort of connect you to me and connect you through to any queries that you might have afterwards. So my email address is on there. My website is tonymcbride.net. And if you search Tony McBride Career Coach on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, you can find me and connect with me in that space as well. But if you have any questions, we've got some time dedicated as well to the Q&A where we can ask any further questions that might come up.
Thanks, Tony. It was brilliant. Has anybody got any questions at all you'd like to ask